And thank you, Eric, for that wonderful introduction. And good morning. My name is Christopher Swanson.
And I am Sara Holtzman.
Excellent. And today we are bringing you Severe Weather, a critical look at policy and procedure. And Sara and I are very grateful that you have shown an interest in this and that you're here to join us today. So hopefully you'll learn something, and we will be happy to answer your questions as we go along. So as we get started, I would like to acknowledge an individual who helped us greatly with this presentation. For those of you who are familiar with Northern Illinois University, I'm sure you're familiar with Gilbert. Gilbert Sabensky is our staff meteorologist at Northern Illinois University, and it's just a hoot and a riot. And he was very gracious in giving me some of his time to talk to him regarding this issue. I do want to note that as helpful as he was, this presentation is the work of Sara and myself and doesn't represent his opinions, but at the same time, he was just an invaluable resource, so we say thank you to him for all the work that he did on our behalf. So let's get started and figure out, okay, so why now? Why is this an important issue? Well, quite simply put, be honest. When was the last time your severe weather policy was updated in your department? When policies are revised, when you look at your departmental methods of handling emergencies, oftentimes this is a policy or this is an idea that just gets carried over year to year. It's in writing, it's good, we're just going to carry it over, copy and paste it. But at the same time, is it really reflective of where we are in our modern world today? Is it really reflective of steps for recovery or steps for preparedness that are not reliant on electric, are not reliant on power or modern conveniences such as cell phones? Because one of the themes that we're going to be bringing up again and again is that these items are very fragile. These are methods of communication or methods of getting information to students or methods of recovery that can be very easily taken out by a severe weather event. And one of the other big themes that we're going to talk on is, do you have plans and resources in place that are redundant? So if one part of the response chain or one part of the preparedness chain breaks, there's a place where you can repair it very quickly. And that's going to be important because, again, we want to be sure that the items that are in place, the things that are in place, are in fact reflective of a plan that is not only very well served to the students, but also is really preparing for the worst. That it's not a plan that just assumes the worst could happen, but says the worst will happen, and that this plan will address our needs at the end of the day. So, this past summer, we saw some very large storms. Are you ready for something like the Moore tornado to roll through your campus? Are you ready for something like that to happen? And that's a question you should be asking yourself. If that happened tomorrow, and it could, late September, early October is a time where severe weather tends to flare back up again, is this something that my policies reflect a response for? So, oh, Sara, if you could go one more slide. Sorry, it popped up the same thing. So, I ask you to think, when you look at your policy and you go back through, think about it in two ways. First off, is it safety-centered? That is, does this policy really address safety? Does it really address what it means to be to take care of people and to be sure that they're not going to a place, that they're not following a step-by-step method that could potentially put somebody in danger, or that the policies don't reflect a response that could put somebody in danger? Is it safety-centered? And of course, is it student-centered? Does it take care and address the students so that they, when they're in their communities, have a way of feeling safe and secure within that community in regards to a severe weather response? Do you have a means to disseminate to students this information that is timely and relevant? It's interesting that a lot of systems that are out there can sometimes be slow by a factor of 5 to 10 minutes. And that's not timely and relevant when you have an EF5 tornado that's rolling through the city in which your campus is located. Severe weather can strike very quickly. And so we have to think, what is the fastest way, what is the most efficient way to do that? And do you know what to do if if it isn't to the hallways and out in 45 minutes. So often when we're alerted to a severe weather emergency, it's we got to the halls, everybody, oh, we're out in the halls, got our blankets, got our laptops. What if that isn't the case? What if something actually happens and that you're stuck in an area for hours? Do you have something in place, an internal policy even, that would address that so that you knew how to respond, you knew what to do afterwards in the event of a long-term stay in a particular place or a longer-term emergency? And, and I just emphasize that this is a life safety issue and should be treated as such. We prepare so much for fires. We prepare so much for life safety in regards to, we train on medical issues. We train on so much. Do we take the time to train on severe weather safety and give it the same credence as those other issues? Because in the same manner as a fire, a tornado is a life safety issue, and we should be doing drills, we should be doing preparedness, have the policies in place, etc. And of course, we're going to elaborate more on this as we go along, but these are the things that we want you to think about going in to this presentation.
So the point in all this, we recognize that a lot of folks seem to feel that storms are in fact getting worse. We keep hearing about these really awful tornadoes that are ripping everywhere apart, as well as the nasty inland hurricanes that have seemed to creep out of nowhere. Things are happening around here, and someone has to do something to be prepared for it, right? So that is part of the point. In addition, GLACUHO schools are all in an area that can indeed have tornado activity tear through them. So it's very important to be prepared, because preparedness is fantastic and we really don't want any surprises, right? Because the surprises are what leads to huge problems. So policies are fantastic, but most of them are a little bit dated, to be quite honest. And so I feel like we can give a real decent refresher and update our policies so that we can respond in the most effective manner. We have to find ways to create redundancies within those policies when we do update them, so we can have backup upon backup upon backup. And we'll definitely continue talking about redundancies through our presentation, because it is something very important. And although technology seems very convenient, it can fail us very quickly as well. So that's definitely something to consider as we work through this presentation. All right, and the difference between emergency and disasters. An emergency is a state in which normal procedures are suspended. Oh, excuse me. Oh my gosh. Sorry. Oh, goodness. I'm sorry, y'all.
Well, here, I'll go ahead and, well, Sarah, will you fix that on your computer? I'll go ahead and continue with those definitions for you.
Yes,
an emergency
please do.
is a state. Oh, yeah, sure. An emergency is a state in which normal procedures are suspended and extraordinary measures are taken in order to avert a disaster. So really, we're just kind of thinking ahead of time on that, whereas that disaster is an occurrence disrupting the normal conditions of existence and causing a level of suffering that exceeds the capacity of adjustment of the affected community. And so today we're talking about disaster preparedness, readiness, and response, because really we're thinking to that extreme, and we want you to think to that extreme as well. Again, there's this feeling that it can't happen here, and it can happen there. And we want you to be sure that we're thinking like that as we talk about policy. So think about what would happen before, during, and after. And we'll talk a little bit in those ways too. But think before, during, and after. So we're going to ask you to prepare for the worst and, of course, hope for the best. And I forgot to say, and I want to clarify that those definitions of emergency versus disaster came from the World Health Organization. So really universally accepted definitions that we're thinking about. So we're going to start talking a little bit about disaster prevention, and I'll let Sarah catch up here really quickly.
Oh.
There we go. Woohoo!
Woo! Sorry, y'all.
All right. So the first thing that we're going to ask you to do, because, we know prevention is 90% of the battle. If you prevent a little bit, you prepare a lot. And so I ask you to first think about what are you relying on. Oh, this is actually a Sara slide. Whoops, that's my mistake. Go ahead, Sara.
Thank you, Chris. I'll pick up right where you left off. What are you what are you relying on? Are you relying on your students and your student staff to be there to really help pull students in and act as role models and give really wonderful direction? Are you relying on a series of text message alerts from your campus safety systems? Are you relying on computers, digital media, things like that, cell phones, possibly even a landline waterfall to notify students, over-the-air radios, television sirens? What is your school actually using to get the message out?
And one thing I have to chime into, please, if you're relying just on the sirens to get the message out, please don't. Those are meant to be heard outdoors. But every one of these can possibly fail, as we'll talk about. But especially, I have to make that note about sirens, because Gilbert, when we talked, absolutely tell them that. Sirens are meant for the outdoors. So I definitely wanted to emphasize that. So a thought about modern technology. Oh, sorry, Sara, did you have anything?
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, perfect. So a thought about modern technology, and I really like this quote. I'm a big Star Trek guy. And this quote really stood out to me. The more they overthink the plumbing, the easier it is to stop up the drain. That was something from Scotty. And so the quote really stood out to me because technology it's great, but there's so many ways in which it can fail, and there's so many ways in which it can fail us because modern technology really is so fragile. So let's stop and think about all those things that Sara talked about. First off, campus alerts. Well, guess what? Campus alert servers rely on electricity. There might also be significant lead time in getting a message out. They might get overloaded. And therefore, we have to, first off, say these could fail. And the second thing is, are these timely? And I've been in situations where they've also sent out alerts saying that the threat was over when, in fact, the sirens were still blaring, the skies were still green, wind was still blowing very hard. And so, they're not perfect. Again, computers and servers rely on power. So if, for example, you're signed up for a text messaging service from a third-party organization, you might not get that. The Internet was, and I can't emphasize this part enough, the Internet was not designed for reliable communication. We certainly have come to rely on it as such, but it was not designed for that. And it is really easy for the plumbing to get stopped up and for messages to not make it. So if your campus is relying on an Internet server of any kind, or your students are relying on apps or on their computer at weather.com, it's really easy to stop that up. Your cell phone transmitters rely on power. So sometimes one transmitter, if you're especially in a large or a smaller town, one transmitter can cover a large portion of that city. It can get cut off, or it can get jammed. So cell phones have three streams: data, voice, and text, SMS text. One of these could get knocked out and limit the ability to communicate. And so it's very possible your voice and text could get knocked out, or your data and voice could get knocked out. And then that one stream that's left could get jammed, and you're not going to be able to get any messages out. Landlines, of course, can be knocked down. And if you have VoIP phones, Voice over Internet Protocol, well, those phones rely on power and also rely on Internet servers. So again, it's very easy for the communication to break down at that point, and that goes back to the fact that the Internet was not designed for reliable communication. FM, AM radio transmitters rely on power, but of course we are going to talk a little bit later. If you have radios, hopefully your transmitters have generators, and that radio is battery-backed. Any radios that you have should always be battery-backed. And of course, television relies on power, and as I said earlier, sirens are meant to be heard outdoors. And if they don't have batteries, well, again, they're relying on electricity, so it's very easy for them to fail.
Okay, and so what we feel the number one, absolutely most important tool is the NOAA weather radio. Every building should have at least one in some sort of central contact point. If it is a residence hall, typically a front desk, or even an academic building for that matter. And staff ideally will be trained on how to respond to it if it does sound, and thinking about those different sounds and different actions that need to be taken once it does sound is very important. And of course, as Chris mentioned, the batteries being in it, or it being actually plugged in and being in use, it's very important. So why a weather radio? Well, we will tell you. Ideally, well, it will sound for all hazards, not just those pesky little things we call tornadoes. It's all about severe storms, flooding, chemical spills, amber alerts, whatever the National Weather Service office sounds for, your weather radio will also sound for. And there is up-to-date forecast information from the National Weather Service. As we all know, that's really wonderful to have access to all the time. And as I have mentioned before, alarm notification is something that it provides that is very fantastic and ultimately speaks to the purpose of this tool. It is a life safety device, just like an ion detector or even a smoke detector in a kitchen. You want to be aware of the things that are happening outside so that you can respond accordingly to it.
Absolutely. And I want to emphasize especially that life safety device piece, because again, we're always checking fire alarms, ion detectors, heat detectors in our buildings. Again, this is a life safety issue, and the weather radio is our life safety device for this. You know, all those other items that I talked about a few slides back, they work well, they're important, but this is your #1 piece for redundant backup, because our weather radio transmitters are powered by emergency generators. If a station's power gets knocked out, it is back on the air within 40 seconds, and they have redundant backup at the office to be notified when a transmitter goes out. So again, this is something that they have automatic redundancies built into, a resource that could run for weeks. Again, they can get people out there, they can get it up, they can get it running, and everything, you know, is automated beforehand. So again, they know when something's wrong and they can get it going back up. It's wired by copper cabling, no fiber optics to get damaged. Again, this is good old technology, tried through, that is hardwired, again, for the most redundancy possible. The radio receivers that you can purchase are all battery backed and can stay active in standby and listen modes, and they're programmable so that you can program them to go off for what you want, where you want, which is very, very handy. And they're inexpensive. $30 will buy you a good radio. And so there's really no excuse not to be taking this seriously as a life safety device. And then what's nice about that is that you can, you know, then develop policies around that about how that's reported out to staff. And again, thinking about that policy in a redundant way so that if the phones aren't working, how is the staff going to be notified? So always good stuff to think about. But the important thing is, like any life safety device, weather radios are only good if they are used correctly. So, I mean, I've said this multiple times, and I'm going to say it one more time. You treat your weather radio like you would any life safety device. Your batteries should be checked and changed twice a year, and oftentimes the radios will either take AA or 9-volt batteries. So again, we're not looking at a great expense, especially if you can get your batteries in bulk. The National Weather Service tests the alert tone at 11 o'clock a.m. every Wednesday, so make sure someone's reporting that that radio is sounding. Don't turn it off. Don't disable it for test. Make sure that it works, just like you would make sure that your fire alarms work in a fire drill. Make sure that your weather radio is working at 11 o'clock every Wednesday. I can't emphasize, and this seems so silly to even have to say, but I've heard stories and was talking to Gilbert, and we told each other stories. And if you use a device for a life safety device, make sure it's plugged in. Make sure staff doesn't unplug it for any reason. If there's a bad night and it's a bad weather night, it can yield a lot of alarms, but annoyance is not a reason to disable that. That still needs to be monitored for a severe weather situation. And so just because somebody's getting annoyed because it's going off, that's why it's programmable to your area and for what you want it to sound for. But if you've programmed it a certain way for a certain area, your staff can't get annoyed and unplug it. That is never a reason to disable a life safety device. It is important to program it correctly. Again, it's easy to disable something when you're programming it, so make sure that you're programming it correctly. And of course, train your staff to know what an alarm means and who this needs to be reported to. The alarms are no good if they're ignored or not reported. And so, but again, be sure you're thinking about if you were supposed to call somebody on duty, what if the phones fail? If we're supposed to go manually report to somebody, what's going to be the safest way, most time-effective way to do that? Is there a chain? Is there, a way that people can start reporting to one another? And of course, I can't emphasize enough, we're talking about redundant policy today. So all those things I talked about a few slides back should all still be in place, should all still work, and should all be operating as a part of a redundant system. And weather radios aren't perfect. One of the unfortunate things about severe weather is nothing is perfect, but this is the benchmark. This is the thing that is set up to be in and of itself redundant with many different backups. So this is why we're emphasizing this as the gold standard of life safety device that you should have for severe weather. And I just said that, it is part of the redundant means of gathering information. So, certainly, you should have these in a central location that they can be reported from.
So, some severe weather procedures. We need to really be thinking about what hazards are in the areas for students when they're directed to them, as outlined in our policies and procedures that we have in place in responding to severe weather. So is there any interior glass? Are there places where flying debris can easily harm students? Could things possibly fall over or down and harm a student? Because that's ultimately what we want to avoid in protecting them from severe weather. This information, by the way, comes from the Storm Prediction Center in NOAA. That resource will be available online as well when we post this. So more importantly than the facility side of things and having areas that could hurt students, are students actually trained to respond to severe weather in ways that would benefit their safety? Do they understand what to do once they actually get into those bathrooms or in the hallway to protect themselves effectively? We all know that life is not a perfect system, and sometimes our student staff that we rely so heavily on cannot be in the building at all time. We would never expect them to be, and so they aren't necessarily there when severe weather strikes. So will students know enough to lead themselves, in addition to just hearing those few voices that are there to help them out? Okay, and some more things to consider. As Chris had mentioned before, how are students actually notified? Do you have redundant procedures in place? I know we keep really stressing redundant procedures, but that's because we feel that they are so important. What should happen if a loudspeaker system fails? What if one of your cell phone towers jams? How will you notify student staff to correctly follow the procedure when you aren't there? You can't be there how many times over to walk them through every step correctly. Are student staff actually involved in notifying residents? What does that look like for your campus? What if student staff is away in class? As I mentioned before, we can't expect them to be in the buildings at all times. And know that no process is perfect, but we can at least have a plan B. Should plan A get a little bit roughed up, at least we have a plan B to fall back on. And of course, is your shelter easy to access? Is it safe for all residents? Locked doors definitely cost some time when you're trying to get in and find a safe space for students, and sometimes those precious moments are the ones we can't afford to lose.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that I can't stress enough and other things to consider, do you conduct drills? Tornadoes can happen year-round. I've seen tornadoes happen on New Year's Day, and I am not making that up. Remember, severe weather is a life safety concern, and I know I sound like a broken record saying that, but it's so true. Do you practice? If the siren sounded right now, would your students know what to do? That's what you need to ask yourself. As you're sitting in a webinar and your students are eating lunch, or they're coming back from class, or they're studying in their rooms, would they know what to do if they got the notification that a tornado was about to hit campus? I would hope the answer to that question is yes, but if you're not conducting drills, you need to be conducting drills. I'm just going to throw that out there right now. One of the other things about severe weather is, when a fire alarm goes off, we tell our students don't use the elevator. And if you look at the elevator button, it's even engraved on the button. It says, in case of fire, use stairs. Are you clear in a severe weather event about not using the elevators? Because elevators rely on power and can get stuck. So if there's a tornado coming through and somebody's using an elevator, that can get them stuck in an elevator, and elevator shafts can turn into wind tunnels. They're actually incredibly dangerous places to be in the event of severe weather. Now, that being said, I could talk about universal design for another day, but this is where some of the principles in thinking about that in regards to emergencies really come into play, because then do you have a plan in place for working with residents with mobility or accessibility concerns. Hopefully you're keeping track of that in regards to fire-related emergencies. That's something that should be kept track of in regards to weather emergencies as well, because those students may need assistance evacuating to a safe place in the event of severe weather emergency. And again, that's something you should be filing away in the back of your mind. Excuse me. And then how will your students know it's okay to leave the shelter? That's one of those questions we all get faced with. Again, if we're talking about when the sirens stop, okay, but what if that siren stopped because power got cut off? What if, is it a 45-minute all clear? Well, what if the weather radio has gone off again? Is there somebody who's still monitoring that or has that with them that can keep the communication chain going? It's not yet safe to evacuate this space. Is it coming through a campus alert system? Again, I've seen campus alert systems activate an all clear well before it was truly safe to evacuate a storm area. Again, thinking about that in a way that we want our students to know if it's okay to leave the shelter, but know it's okay because they're going to be safe, not because a warning has expired or a message has said it's okay to leave. So again, think about that so that our students are kept safe as well. Again, it's that intersection of student-centeredness and safety-centeredness that we're looking for. And finally, I asked you, are your procedures clearly printed or displayed? And I did a brief overview of some university procedures as posted in online documentation. And so as I was doing that review, I found documentation that could cause confusion or chaos due to a lack of specificity. I saw documentation that said, go read the posted sign, which is all well and good, but what if you have a visual impairment? What if it's an emergency and you're experiencing panic and you don't have time to read that sign? So I asked, are your procedures clearly printed or displayed, or I should really say trained on and communicated as well, because students should always have an awareness of that. Just like they know fire procedures, they should know severe weather procedures very quickly and very early in the year so that they can take good care of themselves in an emergency. So I'd like to share some good examples that I found. And again, this is my opinion, this is not Gilbert's opinion, but this is our opinion of some great examples that we saw. First off, this is from the Minnesota State University at Mankato. And what I really liked about this, first off, is that this is not specific. I'm sorry, this is not general. This is very specific to every single community that this university has, and the procedures are tailored to that. It says exactly where to go, says exactly what to do in a very concise way, easy to find, easy to note, easy to follow, and it's published online for anybody to find, and they indicate nothing is perfectly safe. We liked that. And we do wish it talked about redundant locations in the event that time doesn't allow students to move throughout a building. But overall, this is a very good job and a great example of something to tailor to, instead of having just a please move to the lowest floor of your residence hall in a back hallway, because students may not always know where that is exactly. So this is a very good job. Of course, I have to give a shout out to Northern Illinois University, because I think they do a terrific job, just an absolutely terrific job in communicating their emergency procedures in regards to severe weather. So again, this is concise, it is clear. What I really liked about this is it does talk about the elevator issue. And again, individual locations, very specific where to go, concise, and you know, one of the things that is also very good about this is it talks about the sirens not being a reliable means of communication and not to rely on them. And so as you're going through policy and procedure, it is very, very clear what you're supposed to do, and we like that. Again, we wish it talked about redundant locations in case it wasn't okay to move throughout a building. But overall, again, a very good job. And this is as helpful for professional staff as it is to students. That's the other thing we want to emphasize, is that as a professional staff member, sometimes we end up in buildings that are not our own. And so if we need to help in an evacuation, it's really easy to consult this and know exactly where we need to be directing our students. So, of course, great shout out to Northern Illinois University. And finally, I have one from the University of Texas at Austin. Of course, we wish there were exact locations. This one isn't necessarily, you know, as good as talking about exact locations in a building, but what we like about this one is it covers a formal process of what to do, where not to go, what hazards to watch out for, what areas to avoid, how you're supposed to cover oneself, waiting for directions to leave a shelter, taking radios, and not using a phone. And so we like that because it really emphasized a lot of those things that we talked about, thinking about what are you accounting for in your shelter space. So again, these are just 3 examples. There are many great examples out there, but we certainly urge you to think about, if you have generic policies or policies that aren't specific, to go back and review those, because we don't want anybody to be confused. We don't want anybody to be turned around. In a time-critical emergency, everybody should know exactly what to do, and this is why, you know, doing drills is so important, because as that drill is going on, students shouldn't just be walking through and then going back to their rooms. You should be thinking about what hazards could be in the way. Is it timely? Is it easy? Etc. So again, these are things to be thinking about. They're a very good job with those campuses. So now we're going to talk a little bit about post-disaster. And Sarah, that's you.
Mm-hmm. So we urge you to think about communications. Definitely keeping that weather radio handy near you. Someone should be able to hear it, to look for continued updates. What sort of redundant communication systems do you have that don't actually rely on cell phones? The cell phones typically could be jammed after a disaster. I think Chris provided an absolutely fantastic example as far as DeKalb is concerned. In 2008, there was a campus shooting that occurred, and Verizon cell towers were actually out for 3 days. That is an awful long time to be without any sort of communication, knowing that cell towers are all down, and not to mention a very scary time. So it's something to consider. Try to think about the multiple streams of communication. What if all the power is out? How are you going to get messages out? How are you going to be safe? And basic needs, how are those going to be met? We don't know if there actually is a perfect solution, but there are definitely suggestions to continue to make the responding process a little bit better. Are there procedures for faculty inspections to ensure that things are safe, and there is a process for after a disaster or emergency occurs? Are there procedures, internal or not, about what to do should a tornado damage a hall or a hall or living area beyond repair just right then and there? Where will those students live? How will they live? And things like that. Definitely some things to think about in addressing your policy or just everyday life at your campus.
Absolutely. And, you know, I realize, you know, as we're going through these, you know, post-disaster slides, that we're asking you a lot of questions and that we're not giving a lot of suggestions. And I realize that that may be frustrating, but at the same time, it's all campus-specific. And that's one thing we want to emphasize, is that this is all about campus-specific procedures and policies. So we're hopefully asking you the questions that will help you develop the policies that are appropriate for your campus. So, of course, I have to come back and talk about redundancy yet again. If you haven't figured out by now that the best way to be prepared for severe weather and to be even prepared afterwards is to have redundant to have redundant policies and procedures in place, then Sara and I have failed because, again, redundancy is so important. So, first off, we ask you, do you have a safety backup site or designated officials away from campus? The reason for that is, what if on-campus safety is disabled? What if campus is hit and nobody's able to communicate or get around with one another? Is there anybody off-site who can help with disaster responses? Even if it's a local satellite, even if it's just a local facilities operation that's off campus, is there someone or some way to get somebody from off campus to have assistance or to be able to provide assistance, because they may be able to provide information and to start planning before a campus may be able to if they have been hit by a severe storm. Do you have procedures that include multiple data inputs and outputs? Again, if one person or resource is not available, what else is there? What else do you find that you have on your campus that you can have people report to or report back to other individuals who've been involved with the disaster? So again, think about who to give information to, who's giving information out, and do you have multiple people who can assist with that? And finally, have you worked with campus partners to know their plans? We all know our campuses are interconnected. We all know that there are multiple divisions doing multiple things. So once a disaster has hit, a great example that I can think of is, have you worked with, perhaps your counseling and student development center to begin addressing maybe some of the grief that has come with that disaster? Have you talked to somebody about plans in place for providing emotional support? Or have you worked with your powerhouse about what to do in regards to preparing their facilities afterwards or inspecting their facilities? Have you worked with your other divisions to know what they're going to do so that you aren't wondering, well, gee, is somebody going to come around and look at this? I don't know. This is, that we're not scratching our heads, that we're actually acting to take care of our students and provide safe facilities for them. So I guess we have time, which is really exciting. I wanted to talk a little bit about Storm Ready. Storm Ready is a program that when I was talking to Gilbert, we were really excited to talk about, because it's really a community preparedness program that's run through the National Weather Service. Northern Illinois University was the first storm-ready campus in the entire nation, which is really exciting. And there's no reason that your campus can't get certified to be storm-ready as well, because we've talked a lot about what to do before, during, and after severe weather, and this is a great way to encompass all of that in a standardized program that's meant for communities. And if you go and look at this up, it really is emphasized for communities that are more like towns and cities, but our campuses are communities as well, and the National Weather Service out of Chicago worked with Northern Illinois in viewing them that way. And so this is something to think about for your campus as well. So what does Storm Ready mean? It means that you've established a 24-hour warning point and emergency operations center. You have more than one way to receive severe weather warnings and forecasts to alert the public, to create a system that monitors weather conditions locally, promote the importance of public readiness through community seminars, and develop a formal hazardous weather plan, which includes training severe weather spotters and holding emergency exercises. Sounds a lot like what we've talked about up to this point. And of course, and I'm just going to go through a couple ideas of how Northern Illinois has implemented that. With the 24-hour warning point, the police department, public safety, and campus office, they all have access to current radar and forecasting data and multiple ways to report that information out: phone, radio, you name it, they've got it. Have more than one way to receive severe weather warnings. Again, that's redundant access, just like we said. The weather radios are the benchmarks, but they have redundant communications in place to get that information. Create a system that monitors weather conditions locally. We're going to talk about that coming up, because we have some resources that even you can use without being Storm Ready certified that you can put to work on your campus. Promote the importance of public readiness through community seminars. Well, you may not have a staff meteorologist, but you can still coordinate with the National Weather Service to help train people to be weather spotters. They actually have this formal training program, and they are just ecstatic to be able to provide that to people. And so you certainly can call them up and coordinate it on your campus. But you will want to have a campus official trained by them to conduct training for like student staff to be able to be knowledgeable on severe weather, and give severe weather trainings to all staff and keep that open to students as well. And when we say all staff, we mean all staff. The day that I spoke to Gilbert. He was preparing to deliver severe weather training to the building service workers, and so we mean that when we say all staff. And develop a formal hazardous weather plan, which including severe weather spotters and holding emergency exercises. Very self-explanatory. So, think about your public safety backup site. It's not a part of Storm Ready, but this is necessary really to make that work. And, one of the things that Gilbert wanted me to say as well is that Storm Ready is based on technological diversity. I know Gilbert maintains a website at Northern Illinois dedicated to weather from forecast to alerts to informational sections and safety. That's just one piece. But that technological diversity is yet another way to get information out to students, which is very powerful as well. Now, I do have to give you a word of caution. You can't just do these things, pat yourself on the back, and call yourself Storm Ready, because that's not the way that it works. It's done in conjunction with your local National Weather Service office, and they don't let you stagnate. So if you choose to think about, maybe we want to become Storm Ready certified, you need to be prepared to do a lot of hard work to keep up with their standards and to keep revising your policies to make sure that they're safety-centered and community-centered as well. It does take time, but the thing about Storm Ready is it involves putting procedures in place that should be in place regardless. So when you work with your National Weather Service, that's something that they can help you do in regards to making sure that your policies and procedures are up to date, are reflective of modern and best practice. And really, even if you don't want to go the Storm Ready route, if you have questions about making sure that your policies really are reflective of the best safety and best practices for your facilities, call your National Weather Service office up regardless, because they will be more than happy to assist you with that. If they're anything like what I did in my research for the presentation, when talking to Gilbert, they'll be gleeful that you even thought about doing that. So, and I have to say, I simplified Storm Ready significantly. So, again, it's not as simple as I made it look, but at the same time, it's something to consider. And so finally, we want to provide you with some resources that we found very helpful and that were recommended to us as part of our research. First off, as we talked about providing, a center to monitor data, there's wonderful radar software out there that goes well beyond the capabilities of weather.com. One that was recommended to us was one that was called GR Level 3. It costs $80 and is Windows only. But you can use that software. It provides satellite data and will give you data feeds from the National Weather Service to provide block indicators of where a storm is and block indicators of where a warning polygon is. And what that means is that those polygons, those blocks, are going to show up on that map, and you're going to see satellite data that is as good or better than what you would see in Google Maps, and that polygon is going to be overlaid so you can see to the street where a warning is in effect, so that you know exactly what areas are at risk. So again, the data is over the internet from the National Weather Service, which is not perfect. If the servers get bogged down, or can be hooked up to other equipment if you own it, such as a satellite or a radar, but of course that can get pricey. But the data over the internet from the National Weather Service is free of charge. There is a free trial with the software, and so some uses that we identified is that you could install that for a campus monitor to see where storms are headed, or have that staff on ready to go, that they know what's happening. You can have it on a public computer or a display for students to see and play around with, or you can hook that computer up to a TV so students can see that. And so we provided the link. You can also purchase data feeds to integrate with the radar from a company called Alice in the House that includes a myriad of reports, and so you can hook that up and get that sent through as well. But I do have to provide a disclaimer that Gilbert does work part-time for them. So when we were talking about that resource, he wanted to be sure that you knew that there was that interest there as we presented that resource. But I really liked what I saw, and it seemed very comprehensive. So that's certainly something to do if you have $80 to spend. But if you don't, here's another great idea and a wonderful resource to put up for your students. Students have apps. They're very connected to their smartphones, but there's still something to be said if you have TVs in your lobby or a campus cable network for providing warnings, providing information through that network so students can see that and pay attention to that as they're coming into a building or as they're flipping through their channels. Some of you may remember watching the Weather Channel when you were younger and seeing The picture over at the right, that was from a device called the WeatherStar 4000, and there is a free emulator out there that will pull data from the National Weather Service and actually run that WeatherStar type software so that it turns your computer into a weather channel like local forecast display that loops. It is highly customizable. It is grabbing data from the National Weather Service. It is free. And that bottom area, just like they used to run messages across that, you can put whatever messages you like there. So if you're running a forecast loop and you want to put up notification about a campus event, you can do that. And so that's yet another redundant way to advertise for your campus events as well as get information out. Again, is this perfect? Well, no, because it relies on an internet feed, but it's yet another way to reach students. So you can hook that up to a TV in a lobby to display up-to-the-minute forecasts and warnings. Because it does. It turns red when there's a warning, and it'll update automatically. Nobody has to touch that computer. Or you can broadcast that over campus cable. This is actually what Northern Illinois does. They are not running a real WeatherStar. They're running that emulator, and so Gilbert just sets it up and lets it go, and it does its thing. And it automatically updates, does everything automatically, and students can tune to that, get a quick forecast, know what's coming, and have that knowledge ahead of time. So this is a great preventative measure. If students know that there's a risk for severe weather, they can take preparedness ahead of time. And so the link there, tiganet.com, is there if you wish to download that and set that up. And finally, for weather radios, Midland Radio. This is not an endorsement of Midland Radio, but it's a great resource because this is one of the most common brands of weather radio. And so you can buy them off the shelf at many retailers. They're great workhorse units. They have a diversity of products to meet different needs. You may be able to bulk order for them. And just something I noticed in my research is that Amazon tends to sell their radios for less than the price on their website. So if you do research and you look like at Amazon or other retailers, you may be able to find them cheaper than what's on there. Midland certainly is not the only company that sells these, but again, a great resource if you're starting in research to start your research. And again, just a great place to start. Great workhorse units that are available from Midland. It's certainly something you should start your research into purchasing. So concluding thought, the concluding thought for our presentation. This is something Gilbert really wanted me to tell you. And this is a quote directly out of his mouth. He asked me to quote him, and I am going to do just that. People do not understand how fragile the communications infrastructure is. And in the modern age, it's become less reliable because of convenience. The Internet was not designed for reliable communication. The reason I'm concluding with this thought is this really sums up what we've talked about in regards to preparedness and being able to work with a situation during and after it has hit a campus. Communications is fragile. This is why you have to have redundant means of communicating in place and redundant means of receiving information. We need to be sure that we're not just resting on convenience, that we're not just resting on our laurels, but we're actually taking the time and the effort to take this seriously as a life safety issue and to put the same kind of effort into preparedness and response as we would as, say, a fire. And this is very, very, very important. The Internet can't just be relied upon. Sure, there's a lot of great apps out there that can help us. We have text messages. We have instant messages. That's great, but the moment you lose those streams, the data stream or the SMS stream, the voice stream, all three of them, you've lost your ability to communicate with a modern convenience. And so what are you doing to overcome that? And what reliable means of communication have you established on your campus? So that's the thought we want to leave you with. And at this time, Sarah and I would be more than happy to entertain your questions if you have any. Perfect. At this time, it doesn't look like we have any questions. I don't know, we'll wait just a moment more and see if we have any. But while we do that, and then Sarah, I'll let you, if you have any concluding thoughts, I'll let you go. But I just wanted to say thank you to you all for taking an hour out of your day to join us for this. Again, we see this as a very critical issue that needs more attention. So please, please, please don't just come to this webinar and say, oh, gee, well, that was nice. Oh, gee, there's some great ideas in that. We're going to give everything to be posted up to the GLACUHO website. Please review it. Please look it over. Please take the time to review everything we've done, because we hope that you'll put some of these policies and procedures into place on your campus.
Absolutely, and with that, I'd just like to thank you all.
Excellent. Well, it doesn't look like that we have any questions, so I think we're going to conclude at this time. I hope you all have a magnificent day and a wonderful weekend. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.